My name is Harris, 27, and until last month I thought I was helping my struggling parents by paying rent to live in their investment property. For 5 years I faithfully transferred $1,100 monthly, never missing a payment. Then, one night after a brutal 12-hour shift at the accounting firm, I came home to new locks on every door. My key wouldn't work anywhere. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from, "Dad, find your own place, Freeloader. We're done carrying you." Before I dive into how I turned this betrayal around, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like button if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted. Let's get into it. To understand how I ended up locked out of my own home, you need to know a bit about my relationship with my parents, Robert and Linda. Growing up, they always emphasized the importance of financial responsibility. Pay your own way was practically our family motto. They weren't the warmest parents, but they provided the essentials and pushed me to excel academically. When I graduated with my accounting degree back in 2018, the job market was tough. I had student loans and minimal savings, but I was determined to stand on my own feet. That's when my parents made what seemed like a generous offer. They owned a rental property, a modest 2-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood, about 20 minutes from downtown, and they suggested I could live there while getting established in my career. "We'll rent it to you at market rate," my dad explained during Sunday dinner. $1,100 a month, utilities not included. "It's a fair deal, and you'll be helping us with the mortgage." I remember feeling grateful. The arrangement seemed perfect. I'd have my own space, my parents would have a reliable tenant, and I could start building my professional life without the stress of finding an apartment with my limited credit history. "Thanks, I really appreciate this," I told them, already calculating how I'd budget my entry-level accounting salary. My mom added, "Just remember, Harris, this is a business arrangement. We expect the rent on time every month." I nodded, understanding completely. Of course, I wouldn't have it any other way. The house itself was nothing special, built in the 80s, with dated carpeting and a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. But it was clean in a safe neighborhood, and most importantly, it was a place I could call home. I moved in the following weekend, proudly making my first bank transfer to my parents' account before unpacking a single box. Those first couple of years went smoothly. I established myself at a small accounting firm called Westfield and Associates, often working overtime during tax season to prove my value. I never missed a rent payment. In fact, I'd often send it a few days early just to show my parents I was responsible. We'd get together for occasional family dinners, and they seemed proud of how I was building my career. Around the 3-year mark, I began noticing subtle changes in their attitude. Comments about me still living in their house started popping up in conversation, despite the fact that I was paying market-rate rent faithfully each month. "When are you going to get a place of your own, Harris?" my mom asked during Thanksgiving dinner in my 4th year there. "Most young men your age have their own homes by now." I was confused by the question. I thought this arrangement was working for everyone. I've never been late with the rent, and I maintain the property well. My dad cleared his throat. "We just thought you'd be more independent by now." The comment stung, especially since I considered myself quite independent. I was paying my own way, advancing in my career, and handling all my financial responsibilities. Around the same time, I couldn't help but notice some significant lifestyle changes my parents were making. Mom showed up to family dinner wearing a designer watch I knew cost several $1,000s. Dad traded in his sensible sedan for a luxury SUV. They started taking cruises twice a year, posting endless vacation photos on social media. "Business must be good," I commented when Dad mentioned their upcoming Mediterranean cruise. He shrugged, suddenly evasive. "We've had to tighten our belts in other areas. The rental property barely breaks even after maintenance costs." Something about that statement didn't add up. I'd been living there for years and had only requested minor repairs, a leaking faucet here, a broken garbage disposal there, nothing that would eat up significant profits from my rent payments. But I didn't press the issue, not wanting to create tension. My sister Jessica, 2 years older, and living in another state with her husband, always defended our parents whenever I expressed confusion about their comments. "They've worked hard all their lives, Harris. They deserve to enjoy their money now, she said during one of our monthly phone calls. I'm not saying they don't, I replied. I just don't understand why they keep implying I'm somehow taking advantage by living in a house I pay market rent for. Jessica sighed. Maybe they just expected you to be in a different place by now. You know how they are about appearances. The comment hit home. My parents had always been concerned with how things looked to others. Having their 27-year-old son still living in their rental property might not fit the successful family image they wanted to project, regardless of the financial arrangement. As the 5th year of our rental agreement approached, the tension became more noticeable. Mom would make comments about how they were struggling with property taxes and insurance costs, even as she posted photos of her newest luxury handbag. Dad would ask pointed questions about my salary and savings during family gatherings, as if assessing whether I could be paying more. About 2 months before the lockout incident, I finally gathered the courage to directly address the disconnection between their claims of financial struggle and their obvious lifestyle upgrade. I'm confused, I said during a particularly uncomfortable dinner at their home. You mentioned having trouble covering the property expenses, but you're planning your 3rd vacation this year. If the rent I'm paying isn't enough, we should discuss a fair increase. My mother's face hardened. We don't need to justify our spending to you, Harris. What we do with our money is our business. I'm not questioning how you spend your money, I clarified. I'm just confused by the contradiction between saying you're struggling financially while also spending more than I've ever seen you spend before. Dad put down his fork with a clatter. This conversation is inappropriate. We've given you a great deal on that house for years. A little gratitude wouldn't hurt. I was baffled by his response. A great deal I was paying what they themselves had called market rate. But I dropped the subject, not wanting to create more tension. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. Their defensiveness, the growing resentment, the increasing comments about me being a burden. Somehow it was all building toward something I never expected from my own parents. The day my life changed started like any other busy Tuesday at Westfield and Associates. Tax season was in full swing, and I was juggling multiple client portfolios with looming deadlines. I'd been at my desk since 7:30 that morning working through lunch on a particularly complex filing for one of our major corporate clients. My phone buzzed several times throughout the day, but I was too swamped to check it. In the accounting world, April is no time for distractions. My supervisor had already extended our deadline twice, and I was determined to finish everything before leaving that night. By the time I finally closed my laptop, it was nearly 8 o'clock. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the cleaning crew. I packed up my things, rolled my shoulders to release the tension, and headed to my car. The drive home took longer than usual due to an accident on the freeway. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was after 9, and all I could think about was a quick meal and collapsing into bed. I grabbed my briefcase from the passenger seat, trudged up to the front door, and inserted my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Thinking I was just tired and clumsy, I pulled it out and tried again. Still nothing. I frowned, checking to make sure I had the right key, then attempted once more with more force. The key simply wouldn't engage with the mechanism. What the hell? I muttered, stepping back to look at the door. That's when I noticed the lock was different. Brand new, in fact. The worn brass fixture I was familiar with had been replaced with a shiny silver one. My first thought was that there had been a break-in, and the landlord, my parents, had changed the locks for security. I immediately tried calling both my mom and dad, but neither answered. Growing increasingly frustrated, I walked around to the back door, only to find that lock had been changed as well. I noticed my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Walters, peering out her window at me. When our eyes met, she quickly closed her curtains. It struck me as odd, but I was too focused on getting into my home to dwell on it. After trying every possible entry point, I returned to my car and sat there wondering what to do. That's when my phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Find your own place, Freeloader. We're done carrying you." I stared at the words, unable to process them. Freeloader. I had paid them over $66,000 in rent over the past 5 years. I hadn't missed a single payment. What was he talking about? I called him immediately, but he didn't pick up. I tried my mother's straight to voicemail. With shaking hands, I typed a response. Dad, what are you talking about? I've paid rent on time every month for 5 years. Why are the locks changed? His reply came a minute later. We've decided to sell the property. You have until the end of the week to collect your things. They're packed in boxes on the back porch. The shock gave way to a sickening feeling in my stomach. They had packed my belongings without warning. Without any legal notice, I couldn't believe this was happening. With few options, I called my friend Marcus, who lived about 15 minutes away. We'd been friends since college, and he was one of the few people I trusted implicitly. Hey man, I hate to ask this, I said, when he answered, my voice unsteady, but I've been locked out of my house. My parents changed the locks without telling me. Could I crash on your couch tonight? Marcus didn't hesitate. Of course, dude. Come over now. What the hell happened? I honestly don't know, I replied, starting my car. But apparently I'm a freeloader who needs to find his own place. When I arrived at Marcus's apartment, I was still in a daze. He offered me a beer, which I gratefully accepted, and listened as I explained the baffling situation. That doesn't make any sense, he said when I finished. You've been paying them rent this whole time, right? Every month, I confirmed. $1,100 like clockwork. Marcus shook his head. That's messed up, man. And totally illegal. They can't just change the locks without notice, even if they own the place. I nodded, but the legal aspects weren't my primary concern at that moment. The emotional betrayal was overwhelming. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to look out for me, not throw me out on the street without warning. After a mostly sleepless night on Marcus's couch, I drove back to the house early the next morning to check if what my dad said about my belongings was true. Sure enough, stacked on the back porch were about a dozen cardboard boxes with my name scrawled on them in black marker. I spent the next 2 hours loading them into my car, making multiple trips. The whole time I kept looking at the house, my home for 5 years, feeling like I was in some bizarre nightmare. As I went through the boxes in Marcus's living room later that day, I realized several valuable items were missing: my grandfather's watch, some collector's edition books, and a small jewelry box containing my college ring and other sentimental items. But the real revelation came that afternoon, when I received an unexpected call from a man named Gerald Thompson. Is this Harris Mitchell? He asked when I answered. Yes, speaking. This is Gerald Thompson. I own the property at 2345 Maple Street. I understand you've been living there. I was momentarily speechless. He owned the property, but my parents had always said it was their investment house. Yes, I finally managed. I've been renting it from my parents for the past 5 years. There was a pause on the line. Your parents don't own that house, son. They're my tenants. They've been renting it from me for nearly 7 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My parents didn't own the house. They had been renting it themselves and then subletting it to me at a profit, apparently. Mr. Thompson, I said carefully, can you tell me what they pay in rent? $800 a month, he replied. But that's not why I'm calling. They informed me yesterday that they're breaking their lease early. Something about moving to Florida. I need to know your intentions regarding the property. My mind was reeling. $800. I had been paying them $1,100. For 5 years, they had been pocketing $300 a month, $18,000 total from their own son, all while pretending they owned the house and were doing me a favor by renting it to me. And now they were planning to move to Florida. The pieces started falling into place. The luxury purchases, the expensive vacations, the sudden decision to sell the property. It was all part of their retirement plan, funded in part by the profit they'd made from deceiving me. Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I wasn't aware of any of this. My parents changed the locks yesterday without warning me. I've been effectively evicted from my home with no notice. That's not legal, he said firmly. I didn't authorize any lock changes. And as the property owner, I'm telling you, they had no right to evict you, especially without going through me first. As our conversation continued, I learned that my parents had also been late on several payments to Mr. Thompson despite receiving my rent money on time. There had been threatening notices sent to the house, notices I never saw, presumably because my parents intercepted them. By the time I hung up with Mr. Thompson, the full extent of my parents' deception was becoming clear. They had lied about owning the house, overcharged me for rent, pocketed the difference, and then kicked me out without warning when they decided to move on, leaving both me and the actual landlord in a difficult position. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about the money, though, that was significant. It was the calculated deception carried out over years by the people I trusted most. They hadn't just changed the locks on my home. They had locked me out of the truth about our relationship. As the initial shock began to fade, the accountant in me took over. Throughout my professional career, I'd developed meticulous habits when it came to record keeping. It's a trait that serves me well with clients, and as it turned out, it would be my salvation in this personal crisis. That evening, after an unproductive day at work, where I couldn't focus on anything but my situation, I sat down at Marcus's kitchen table and opened my laptop. I navigated to my online banking portal and began pulling up records of every payment I'd made to my parents over the past 5 years. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, placing a plate of reheated pizza beside me. Building my case, I replied, not looking up from the screen. "I need to document everything." And document I did. I created a spreadsheet listing every payment dates, amounts, and even the memo lines where I'd often written rent for April or similar notes. I took screenshots of the transaction history and saved them in a dedicated folder. I calculated the total $66,000 over 60 months. Seeing that number in black and white made my stomach turn. Next, I pulled up all the text messages and emails between my parents and me that mentioned the rental arrangement. There were dozens discussions about repairs, confirmations of payments received, and even the original conversation where they offered me the investment property at market rate. I saved screenshots of everything. My friend Diana stopped by later that evening to check on me after Marcus told her what happened. As a paralegal at a real estate law firm, she brought a valuable perspective. "This is an illegal eviction, clear and simple," she said after I explained the situation. "But it's complicated by the fact that your parents weren't even the property owners. They were subletting to you without the owner's knowledge or permission, which violates most standard lease agreements." I nodded, continuing to organize my evidence. "I'm less concerned about the legality right now, and more focused on understanding the full extent of their deception." Diana leaned forward. "Have you calculated how much they were profiting from you?" I turned the laptop toward her, showing a new section of my spreadsheet. $300 a month for 60 months. $18,000 total. She whistled low. "From their own son. That's cold." "What's colder is that they were apparently late on payments to the actual landlord despite getting my money on time," I added. Marcus, who had been listening from the kitchen, joined us at the table. "You need to talk to a lawyer, man." "First, I need to talk to someone else," I said, pulling up Mr. Thompson's contact information. The next morning, I called my friend Alicia, who worked in real estate law. She confirmed what Diana had suggested. My parents had conducted an illegal eviction, and their subletting arrangement likely violated their lease with Mr. Parents. "Thompson, you have grounds for legal action against your parents," she explained. "But first, let's focus on your immediate needs. You need a place to live, and you need your belongings back." She helped me draft a formal demand letter to my parents, requesting the return of all my property and compensation for the illegal eviction. She also suggested I document everything missing from the boxes they'd packed. I spent that evening creating a detailed inventory of what I knew was missing: my grandfather's vintage Hamilton watch, worth about $2,000, my college ring, several first edition books from my collection, and various other items of both monetary and sentimental value. I estimated the total value at around $5,000. The next day, while searching through one of the boxes of belongings, I found something interesting: a crumpled notice from Mr. Thompson to my parents, dated 3 months earlier, warning them about late payments and threatening eviction if they didn't catch up. They had received this while I was still living there, still paying my rent on time, yet they'd hidden it from me. I also discovered through some careful research and a few calls to local real estate agencies that the actual market rate for a house like the one I'd been living in was closer to $900 a month in our area, not the $1,100 I'd been paying. Even accounting for the $800 they paid Mr. Thompson, they could have charged me a fair $900 and still made a small profit. Instead, they chose to gouge their own son for maximum gain. As my investigation deepened, so did my understanding of what had really been happening these past 5 years. My parents hadn't been struggling financially at all. They had been using my rent money, including the $300 monthly profit, to fund their increasingly lavish lifestyle and prepare for their retirement in Florida. The timeline became clear. They had never intended for me to stay in their house long term. They had planned this move to Florida for some time, and rather than giving me proper notice or having an honest conversation, they chose to change the locks and discard me like an unwanted tenant. The emotional impact was taking its toll. I found myself unable to sleep properly, lying awake on Marcus's couch, running calculations and scenarios in my head. My work performance suffered. I made careless errors that weren't characteristic of my usual attention to detail. My supervisor noticed and called me into his office to ask if everything was all right. I gave him an abbreviated version of what was happening, and to my surprise, he was extremely understanding. "Take a few personal days if you need them, Harris. Get your living situation sorted out. The work will still be here." His kindness nearly broke me. After being treated so callously by my own parents, this basic human decency from my boss felt overwhelming. Marcus and Diana continued to be my rocks throughout this process. Diana helped me understand my legal options, while Marcus provided not just a place to stay, but the emotional support I desperately needed. "I still can't believe they did this," I said one night after spending hours organizing my evidence. "Who does this to their child?" Marcus shook his head. "People who see you as a revenue stream, not a son. And that says everything about them, not about you." His words hit home. This wasn't about my failings as a son. It was about my parents' moral failings as human beings. By the end of the week, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence, payment records, text messages, emails, photos of the changed locks, inventory of missing items, and notes from my conversations with Mr. Thompson. I had also formulated a plan. Rather than immediately confronting my parents with legal threats, I decided to first establish direct contact with Mr. Thompson to discuss the possibility of taking over the lease properly. If I could secure my housing situation first, I would be negotiating with my parents from a position of strength, not desperation. I called Mr. Thompson and arranged to meet him at the property the following day. My parents wouldn't be there, according to my sister Jessica, who had reluctantly shared their schedule. They were attending an open house for a condo in Florida via video call that afternoon. As I prepared for the meeting, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The shock and hurt were still there, but they were now accompanied by a clear-eyed determination. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was prepared to stand up to my parents without fearing their disapproval. They had broken our relationship. Now it was up to me to decide what, if anything, could be salvaged from the wreckage. Before meeting with Mr. Thompson, I decided it was time to respond to my father's dismissive text. I had been gathering evidence and planning my approach for almost 3 days, deliberately not engaging with either of my parents, despite their occasional messages asking when I would be collecting the rest of my junk from their porch. With a steady hand, I composed a text to my father. It was brief and to the point. "Before calling me a freeloader, you might want to review these." I attached screenshots of all 60 monthly rent payments I'd made over the 5 years, each clearly labeled with the date and amount. His response came quickly. "That was the agreement. You lived in our house, you paid rent. That's how the adult world works." I replied with one more screenshot, Mr. Thompson's contact information in my phone, with our call history visible. Then I added, "Interesting definition of your house, considering you were renting it from Mr. U. Thompson the entire time. I know everything, Dad." There was a long pause before his next message appeared. "You had no right to contact him. That's between us and him. And my housing situation is between me and you," I countered. "Yet you changed the locks without notice and took some of my belongings. Would you like me to list what's missing? Or would you prefer to discuss this through our respective attorneys?" He didn't respond, but about 10 minutes later my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. "Harris, honey, I don't know why you're being so difficult about this. We gave you plenty of hints that we needed the house back. We're your parents, we've done everything for you. This attack on us is deeply hurtful. Call me back so we can discuss this like family." The gaslighting was so blatant it almost made me laugh. Plenty of hints. They had given me no direct communication about needing me to move out, let alone the legally required notice period. And the suggestion that I was attacking them by simply standing up for myself was classic manipulation. I didn't call back. Instead, I focused on my upcoming meeting with Mr. Thompson. It was time to address my housing situation directly with the actual property owner. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I met Mr. Thompson at the house. He was a balding man in his 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that I appreciated immediately. "Let me get this straight," he said after we introduced ourselves. "You've been living here for 5 years, paying your parents $1,100 a month while they paid me $800. "That's correct," I confirmed. "And until this week, I believed they owned the property." He shook his head. "They most certainly do not. And they had no right to sublet to you without my knowledge or permission. It's explicitly prohibited in their lease agreement." As we walked through the house, which felt strange to visit as a guest rather than a resident, Mr. Thompson expressed his own frustration with my parents. "They've been late with payments repeatedly over the past year," he explained. "I was actually considering termination of their lease before they suddenly gave notice about moving to Florida. Now I understand where some of my rent money was going into their pockets instead of mine." We sat down at what used to be my kitchen table to discuss options. Mr. Thompson was surprisingly sympathetic to my situation. "Look, son, I'm sorry about what your parents did to you. That's not right. But I've got a property that needs a tenant, and you need a place to live. Would you be interested in renting directly from me? I could offer it to you for $850 a month. That's the actual market rate for this place." The offer was incredibly appealing. Not only would I be able to return to my home, but I'd be saving $250 a month compared to what I'd been paying my parents. "I'd like that very much," I said, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the surge of relief I felt. "When could we make that happen?" "I can have a new lease drawn up by tomorrow," he replied. "As far as I'm concerned, your parents' tenancy ended when they changed the locks without my authorization. That's a material breach of our agreement." Just as we were concluding our discussion, my phone rang. It was Jessica, my sister. "What the hell did you say to Mom and Dad?" she demanded when I answered. "Mom's crying and Dad's threatening to disown you." I simply informed them that I know they don't own the house I've been living in, and that they've been overcharging me for rent for 5 years, I replied calmly. "I'm currently with the actual property owner, arranging to rent directly from him." There was a moment of silence on the line. "What are you talking about? They own that house. It's their investment property." "No, Jessica, it's not. They've been renting it from Mr. Thompson for 7 years. They've been subletting to me at a profit which violated their lease agreement, and now they've illegally evicted me without notice." Another pause. That can't be right." "It is right, and I have all the documentation to prove it." After I hung up with Jessica, I thanked Mr. Thompson for his understanding and arranged to meet him the following day to sign the new lease. As I was leaving, my phone began buzzing repeatedly with calls and texts from both parents. I decided it was time to face them directly. I drove to their house, their actual house, the one they owned, and knocked on the door. My mother answered, her face a mask of injured innocence. "Harris, thank goodness you're here. We need to talk about this misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said, stepping inside. "You lied to me for 5 years about owning that house. You overcharged me for rent and pocketed the difference. Then you illegally evicted me without notice when it suited your plans to move to Florida." My father appeared from the living room, his face flushed with anger. "We did what any landlords would do with a problem tenant." "I was never a problem tenant," I countered. "I paid on time every month. I maintained the property. And I wasn't even your tenant, I was Mr. Thompson's. You were violating your own lease by subletting to me." "We needed that money," my mother interjected, tears forming in her eyes, "for our retirement. After everything we did raising you, putting you through college, don't we deserve some comfort in our golden years?" The audacity was breathtaking. You didn't put me through college. I have the student loans to prove it. And if you needed money, you could have been honest about the arrangement instead of lying to me for 5 years. We gave you a place to live when no one else would rent to you, my father argued. You charged me above market rate to live in a house you didn't even own. I corrected him, and now I'll be renting it directly from Mr. Thompson for $850 a month, $250 less than what I was paying you. My mother's tears dried up instantly. You went behind our backs to our landlord. How could you do that to us? How could you change the locks on your son without warning? How could you take my grandfather's watch and other valuables? How could you lie to me for 5 years about owning a property you were renting? My father's face darkened. We deserved that money after raising you. Do you have any idea how expensive it was to feed and clothe you for 18 years? It was at that moment I realized something fundamental had broken between us. They didn't see me as their son. They saw me as a financial obligation that was now expected to provide returns on their investment. I want my belongings back, I said, my voice steady. All of them, including Grandpa's watch and my college ring. We don't have your precious watch, my father snapped. And if you're going to be ungrateful, you can forget about being included in the will. I don't care about your will, I replied honestly. I care about the $18,000 you took from me under false pretenses and the valuable items that mysteriously disappeared during your unauthorized packing of my belongings. My mother tried a different approach. Harris, sweetheart, we're still your parents. Family should work these things out without threats. What will the rest of the family think if this gets out? They'll think you lied to and stole from your son, I answered. And they'd be right. The conversation deteriorated from there. My father threatened to tell everyone I was an ungrateful son who turned on his parents. My mother alternated between tears and subtle guilt trips about all they had supposedly done for me. Neither acknowledged the fundamental breach of trust their actions represented. After nearly an hour of circular arguments, I realized we weren't going to resolve anything that day. I stood up to leave, pausing at the door to deliver one final message. I'll be sending you a formal demand letter for the return of my belongings and repayment of the rental overcharges. I hope we can resolve this without legal action, but I'm prepared to go that route if necessary. My father's parting words haunted me as I drove away. You'll regret turning against your own blood, Harris. Family is all you have in this world. The irony was painful. They had been the ones to turn against family by treating me as nothing more than a revenue source. For the first time in my life, I was setting boundaries with my parents, and it felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. The next morning I met with Mr. Thompson at his real estate office to sign the new lease agreement. The terms were straightforward. $850 per month for the same house I'd been living in, with a proper month-to-month arrangement that required 30 days' notice from either party. Terminate. I'm giving you a slight discount from what I'd normally charge. A new tenant, Mr. Thompson, explained as I reviewed the document. Partly because you've already proven yourself responsible by maintaining the property well, and partly because I feel bad about what happened with your parents. I appreciated his kindness, especially after the emotional confrontation with my parents the previous day. Thank you. I promise to continue being a good tenant. After signing the lease, we discussed the lock situation. I'll have a locksmith change them back today, he assured me. You'll have the only keys aside from my emergency set. With my housing situation secured, it was time to address the financial aspects of my parents' deception. I worked with Alicia to draft a formal demand letter outlining the facts of the situation and requesting 1. The return of all missing belongings, particularly my grandfather's watch and other valuables. 2. Repayment of $18,000, the amount they had overcharged me in rent over 5 years. 3. Compensation for the illegal eviction and associated costs, temporary housing, moving expenses, etc. We sent the letter by certified mail to ensure they couldn't claim they never received it. Their response came 3 days later, not by mail, but in the form of an angry phone call from my father. "You're suing your own parents," he shouted when I answered. "After everything we've done for you." "It's not a lawsuit," I clarified calmly. "It's a formal request for you to return what rightfully belongs to me. If you comply, there won't be any need for legal action." "We don't have $18,000 just sitting around," he claimed, his tone slightly less hostile. "We've put deposits down on the Florida condo. I'm willing to discuss a payment plan I offered, but I do expect the return of my personal belongings immediately." After more back and forth, including another attempt by my mother to make me feel guilty for destroying the family, they finally admitted they had my grandfather's watch and other items in their possession. "We were holding them for safekeeping," my mother claimed unconvincingly. "We were worried they might get damaged during your move." I arranged to pick up these items the following day, bringing Marcus with me as a witness. Most of my valuables were returned, though some smaller items remained unaccounted for. I documented everything carefully, updating my inventory list. As for the financial settlement, my parents initially refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. They maintained that charging me $1,100 was their right as landlords, regardless of what they were paying Mr. Miters. Thompson. It wasn't until I had Alicia send a follow-up letter detailing exactly how their actions constituted fraud and breach of contract that they began to take the situation seriously. The letter outlined the potential legal consequences, including the possibility of a judgment that could affect their retirement plans. This finally got their attention. After a week of tense negotiations conducted primarily through emails and text messages, we reached a settlement. They would return $10,000 of the $18,000 they had profited from me, to be paid in monthly installments of $500 over 20 months. It wasn't the full amount, but Alicia advised me that accepting this offer would avoid the time, expense, and emotional toll of a prolonged legal battle. I agreed primarily because I wanted to move forward with my life, rather than remain entangled in conflict with my parents. We formalized the agreement with a simple contract which my parents signed reluctantly. My father couldn't resist adding one final barb: "I never thought my own son would extort money from his parents." "It's not extortion to ask for the return of money that was taken under false pretenses," I replied, maintaining my composure. "I'm actually accepting much less than what you owe me." With the legal matters settled as well as they could be, I focused on reclaiming my home. Mr. Thompson had the locks changed as promised, and I was able to move back in within a week of signing the new lease. The house felt different now. Knowing the truth about who owned it and how I had been deceived within its walls changed my perception of the space. I decided to use some of the settlement money to make improvements to the property with Mr. Thompson's permission. I repainted the living room and bedroom, replaced the dated bathroom fixtures, and installed new kitchen cabinet hardware. These small changes helped me reclaim the space as truly mine. During this period, Mr. Thompson and I developed a positive relationship. He appreciated my accounting background and occasionally asked for advice regarding his rental properties. When he mentioned he might sell some of his properties in the next few years as part of his own retirement plan, he made an unexpected offer. "If I do decide to sell this place, I'll give you first option to buy it," he said during one of our conversations. "You've proven yourself responsible, and I'd rather sell to someone who already cares for the property." The offer was meaningful, representing a vote of confidence from someone who had no obligation to look out for my interests, unlike my parents. It was a stark contrast that wasn't lost on me. As for my parents, they made their first few settlement payments on time, though each transfer came without comment. They proceeded with their plans to move to Florida, selling most of their furniture and preparing for a fresh start in retirement. Through Jessica, I learned they were telling family members a heavily edited version of our conflict, casting themselves as generous parents who had helped their son for years only to be repaid with ingratitude and legal threats when they needed to reclaim their property for retirement purposes. Rather than engage in a battle of narratives, I focused on documenting the truth. I organized all my evidence into a clear, factual timeline that I could share with any family members who asked for my side of the story. Some chose to believe my parents without question, but others, particularly my mother's sister, Aunt Carol, who had always been supportive of me, took the time to review my evidence and acknowledged the deception that had occurred. The most difficult aspect of this period was establishing boundaries with my parents while still maintaining some kind of relationship. I made it clear that I was open to rebuilding trust, but that would require acknowledgement of their actions and genuine remorse, neither of which was forthcoming. Instead, they continued to view themselves as victims of an ungrateful son while making their settlement payments with obvious resentment. It was a painful reality to accept, but an important one. Sometimes family members show you exactly who they are, and believing them is an act of self-respect. The first few weeks back in my house, now truly my house, with a legitimate lease from the actual owner, were a period of significant adjustment. The physical space was the same, but everything else had changed. I was paying less rent, dealing with an honest landlord, and most importantly, living with a new understanding of my relationship with my parents. I threw myself into making the house feel like mine again. Beyond the cosmetic improvements I'd already made, I rearranged furniture, replaced items that reminded me too much of the past, and created a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been when I believed my parents' lies. One of the most therapeutic changes was converting the second bedroom from a rarely used guest room into a home office. I invested in a good desk, a comfortable chair, and proper lighting, creating a space where I could work from home when needed and pursue personal projects during evenings and weekends. Meanwhile, my parents completed their move to Florida, sending me formal notification of their new address only because it was required for our settlement agreement. The monthly payments continued to arrive on time, though, without any personal messages attached. Jessica struggled to navigate the new family dynamic. She called me less frequently, and when we did speak, there was a tension that hadn't existed before. She hadn't fully accepted my version of events, but she also couldn't entirely dismiss the evidence I'd shared with her. "I just want everyone to get along," she said during one particularly difficult conversation. "Can't you forgive them and move on? They're getting older and family should stick together." "Forgiveness requires acknowledgement and remorse," I explained. "They've shown neither. And family works both ways. They didn't stick with me when they changed the locks without warning." Despite these challenges with my immediate family, I found unexpected support from extended relatives once the truth began to emerge. My Aunt Carol in particular became a valuable ally. Having experienced her own conflicts with my mother, her sister, over the years, she understood the patterns of behavior better than most. "Your mother has always been concerned with appearances and financial security, sometimes at the expense of honesty," she told me during a long phone call. "I'm sorry you had to learn that lesson so painfully." Aunt Carol helped me connect with other family members who had been told distorted versions of the situation, quietly correcting misconceptions without creating additional drama. It was through her that I learned my parents had been planning their Florida retirement for at least 2 years long before they gave me any indication they wanted me to move out. Beyond family, my friendships deepened during this period. Marcus and Diana had been there for me during the initial crisis, but their continued support during the rebuilding phase was equally important. We established a weekly dinner tradition, rotating between our homes, that provided stability and connection when I needed it most. My professional life also evolved in unexpected ways. The confidence I gained from standing up to my parents translated into more assertiveness at work. When the annual review period came around, I advocated for myself more effectively than I ever had before, resulting in a significant promotion and salary increase. "You've really stepped up these past few months," my supervisor commented during the review. "There's a new level of confidence in your work and your client interactions." He wasn't wrong. Something fundamental had shifted in how I viewed myself and my worth. Having discovered the extent to which my own parents had been willing to exploit me financially, I was no longer willing to undersell my value in any context. The healing process wasn't linear, of course. There were difficult days, particularly around holidays and family events. Thanksgiving was especially challenging, the first one in my adult life, without any contact with my parents. Rather than spending it alone, I accepted an invitation from Marcus and his family, who welcomed me warmly. It was a different kind of family experience. Noisy, chaotic, and genuinely affectionate, in a way my own family gatherings had never been. "You're always welcome here," Marcus's mother told me as I was leaving, anytime, holiday or not. Her simple kindness brought tears to my eyes. It was a powerful reminder that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about who treats you with love and respect. As the months passed, I established a new routine and a new normal. The monthly payments from my parents continued to arrive, slowly rebuilding my savings after the financial hit of the temporary housing and legal consultations. I used some of the money to further improve my living space and invested the rest. My parents made occasional attempts to re-establish contact on their terms, usually through Jessica. They would suggest family phone calls or video chats, but always without acknowledging the elephant in the room, their deception and its aftermath. I remained open to reconciliation but firm in my boundaries. I'm willing to talk when they're ready to have an honest conversation about what happened, I told Jessica consistently. That honest conversation never came. Instead, they settled into a pattern of occasional text messages that carefully avoided any mention of our conflict, acting as if we were simply busy family members who hadn't spoken in a while rather than participants in a fundamental breach of trust. I responded politely but briefly to these messages, neither encouraging nor completely shutting down the minimal contact. It was a delicate balance, maintaining my self-respect while leaving the door slightly ajar for a more meaningful relationship in the future should they ever be willing to acknowledge the truth. My relationship with Mr. Thompson continued to develop positively. He appreciated my prompt payments and the improvements I'd made to the property, occasionally stopping by to chat when he was in the neighborhood. During one such visit, he mentioned again his potential interest in selling the house. "I'm starting to think about downsizing my rental portfolio," he explained. "Would you be interested in discussing a rent-to-own arrangement? You've been an excellent tenant, and I'd rather sell to someone who already cares for the property." The suggestion was intriguing. After consulting with Alicia about the legal aspects and a financial advisor about the practical considerations, I began exploratory discussions with Mr. Thompson about what such an arrangement might look like. By the 1-year anniversary of the lockout incident, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. I was still in the same physical house, but everything else had changed: my relationship with my parents, my career trajectory, my financial situation, my social connections, and most importantly, my sense of self. The painful betrayal had forced me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about family trust and self-worth. In doing so, I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and built connections with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide them. As I sat in my home office that evening, reviewing the documents for the potential rent-to-own agreement with Mr. Thompson, I realized something profound. Being locked out of that house had ultimately unlocked a better life, one built on honesty, respect, and genuine connection, rather than manipulation and deceit. Today marks exactly 1 year since I came home to find new locks on my doors and received that text from my father calling me a freeloader. Looking back, it's almost difficult to recognize the person I was then. Someone who had never truly stood up to his parents, who accepted their narrative without question, and who measured his worth largely through their approval. The journey from that night to where I am now has been challenging, painful, and ultimately transformative. As I sit in my living room, the same physical space, but now truly my own, I want to share some reflections on what I've learned and how I've grown. First and foremost, I've discovered the immense value of documentation and financial literacy. My habit of keeping meticulous records literally saved me from being painted as the villain in my parents' fabricated story. Every payment recorded, every text message saved, every agreement documented. These created an unassailable foundation of truth that even my parents couldn't argue against effectively. For anyone watching this who might be in a financial arrangement with family members or friends, please take this advice seriously. Document everything. Not because you expect betrayal, but because clear records protect everyone involved and prevent misunderstandings. It's not about trust, it's about clarity. The second major lesson involves recognizing the difference between family obligations and exploitation. For years, I operated under the assumption that because my parents had raised me, I owed them unquestioning loyalty and financial support. What I've come to understand is that while family members should certainly help each other, healthy relationships are reciprocal and transparent, not one-sided and deceptive. This past year has also taught me to recognize the immense value of chosen family. When my blood relatives betrayed me, it was friends like Marcus and Diana who provided not just practical support, but the emotional foundation I needed to rebuild. Marcus's family welcomed me for holidays and casual Sunday dinners alike, showing me what genuine family connection looks like: supportive, honest, and without hidden agendas. Perhaps the most profound change has been in how I advocate for myself in all areas of life. Standing up to my parents was the first domino that triggered a series of positive changes: negotiating a promotion at work, establishing healthier boundaries in all my relationships, and even improving how I communicate my needs in everyday interactions. The financial aspects of this journey have been significant as well. I'm now paying $250 less in monthly rent than I was before, and the settlement payments from my parents have allowed me to build a substantial emergency fund for the first time in my life. More importantly, Mr. Thompson and I have signed a rent-to-own agreement, meaning that a portion of my monthly payments is now going toward eventual ownership of the house. It's ironic that my parents' attempt to cast me out has ultimately put me on a path to homeownership sooner than would have been possible otherwise. Their deception meant to fund their retirement at my expense, instead accelerated my financial independence. As for my relationship with my parents, we've reached what I would call a state of distant civility. They continue to make their monthly settlement payments now through an automated bank transfer that requires no direct communication. We exchange brief text messages on birthdays and major holidays. Jessica remains hopeful that time will heal the rift, but I've accepted that without genuine acknowledgement and remorse from my parents, our relationship will never return to what it was, nor should it, given what I now know about their five-and willingness to exploit me. The question of forgiveness is one I've struggled with throughout this journey. Many well-meaning people, including some family members, have encouraged me to forgive and forget for my own peace of mind. What I've come to understand is that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, nor does it mean pretending the betrayal never happened. For me, forgiveness has been an internal process of releasing the acute anger and hurt, not because my parents deserve it, but because carrying those emotions was preventing me from fully embracing my new life. I've forgiven them in the sense that I no longer spend energy wishing for retribution or dwelling on the pain, but I maintain the boundaries necessary to protect myself from further exploitation. This approach has allowed me to move forward with my life in ways that would have been impossible had I remained consumed by resentment. I've advanced in my career, deepened my friendships, explored new interests, and even started dating someone who respects my boundaries and values honest communication. One unexpected outcome of this experience has been a newfound sense of purpose in helping others navigate similar situations. I've become something of an unofficial resource among friends and colleagues for questions about tenant rights, family financial entanglements, and setting healthy boundaries. Being able to transform my painful experience into assistance for others has been profoundly healing. The house itself has been completely transformed as well. What was once a space where I felt like a temporary occupant is now truly my home. I've renovated the kitchen with Mr. Thompson's permission, replaced all the flooring, and painted every room in colors I chose. Each improvement represents not just an aesthetic change, but a reclaiming of space that was once tainted by deception. Looking ahead, I'm cautiously optimistic about what the future holds. The rent-to-own agreement gives me a clear path to homeownership within the next 5 years. My career continues to advance with opportunities for further promotion on the horizon. And most importantly, I now have a much clearer understanding of what healthy relationships look like and the courage to insist on them in all areas of my life. If there's one message I hope others take from my story, it's this: trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and don't let family ties prevent you from protecting yourself. Blood relation doesn't entitle anyone to exploit you, manipulate you, or disrespect your basic rights. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is to establish firm boundaries, even with or especially with the people who are supposed to love you most. The night my parents changed those locks, I felt like my world was ending. In reality, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I write my own story instead of accepting the role they had assigned me. The keys they took away unlocked something far more valuable than a front door. They unlocked my independence, my self-respect, and my ability to build a life on my own terms. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who treated you unfairly? How did you handle it? and what did you learn from the experience? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support the channel. Remember, sometimes the people who are supposed to have your back are the ones you need to watch most carefully. Thanks for listening, and I hope my experience helps someone else find their strength during difficult times.